Hello and welcome to this webinar. We've gone live a few minutes early, just so that we can all, get ourselves comfortable, get a cup of tea, get your notepads ready, and whatever you need to do. We'll be starting at past on the dot. But if you have joined us a couple of minutes early, please do introduce yourself. Let us know who you are. Let us know where you're joining us from. And then we'll be starting our webinar where we're really excited to be sharing our latest research with you. For those of you who don't know us, my name's Jo Keeler, and we're based in a lovely office in Comberton, which is just outside of Cambridge in the UK. And I think the sun's shining. I haven't even had a chance to go outside yet. My goodness, it's lovely blue skies.
Lovely.
It is, isn't it? It's not fair. We should be going out there, Vicky. We'll do that straight after here. And this is Victoria Brown, who's our head of R&D, and is also in the office with us in Cambridge. So if you would like to share who you are and where you are joining us from, please do so in the comments, which I believe is on the right-hand side for you on StreamYard. I'm never 100% sure. We all use so many platforms nowadays, don't we? We make so many assumptions. So please do. We shall be starting in about 2 minutes, which will be great. We've just been, Vic and I just sort of going through all of the work that we've done, and my goodness, I was also then saying, but can't we look at this? Can't we look at that? And the answer is yes, we can, but Jo, I can only do one thing at a time. So look out for some more research and more webinars shortly. Oh, hello there. Hello, Dawn. Lovely to see you. You are from Leeds City Council. You're a digital learning officer. Fantastic. It's also lovely in West Yorkshire. That's good to know. Good to know. Nice. Thank you for joining us, Dawn. Gary, hello there. You're in Portugal. There's always one, isn't there? There's always one. You just think,
I'm sure
not that I
it's
wouldn't
lovely
want to
there
be in
too.
West Yorkshire. I'm sure it's lovely. But I think Portugal would be amazing. Okay. And we have Marciana from the Glasgow School of Art. You're a careers advisor. Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have Matt. Hello, Matt, just outside of Reading. Brian from DHU Healthcare in sunny Nottingham. And we have Anne joining us from Denmark. Again, as I state at every single webinar, it's always wonderful to see the diversity of people we have. We're talking about age diversity as part of this webinar, but also geographical diversity is wonderful too. And now everybody comes in. There's a delay between me asking for feedback and it appearing on my screen. Hi, Mel from London. Hi, David from Alsace. And hi, Surya from the Netherlands. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so it's past and it's time that we start this webinar. Today, we're going to be spending 45 minutes or so looking at building intergenerational teams with Belbin Team Roles. My name's Jo Keeler and I'm the MD here at Belbin, and we have Victoria Brown joining us, who is the head of R&D at Belbin as well. We've been working together for almost 19 years now.
19, yes.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. So what is the format going to be for the next 45 minutes? It is one, don't worry, we will be sending out an email with a link to the paper that explains and explores this research in more detail. So we will be sending that to you. We've tried not to put too much on the slides, but enough to give you a flavour of what it is that we've talked about. You don't want just to be reading, you want to be listening and contributing to the conversation. So the paper will be sent out, and we'll send that either straight after this or tomorrow morning when we've ticked a few more things off our to-do list. We would really invite you to make comments and ask us questions, and by doing that on the chat function, because we want to make sure that you're getting enough out of today. Unfortunately, Tracy, who's normally in the background looking after the chat, she's on holiday. I know, I tried to ban it, it didn't work. So I will be looking after the chat at the same time, so apologies if I get somewhat distracted, but it's okay because you're in the safe hands of Victoria. Just a quick one, we have somebody else in Portugal. Alice, lovely to see you. Christie's from Amman in Jordan. Oh, wonderful. My brother used to live there. Gorgeous place. Clive from Norwich. We have Katie from London. We have lots of people coming in, but I'm getting distracted now. My resource investigator behaviour is somewhat high, so I'm going to try and ignore that for a little bit. I'll come back to it later. Okay. The question is, why are intergenerational teams important? And why have we undertaken this research? Vicky, over to you.
Yes, I think I've been, I don't know about you, Joe, but I've been quite sort of overwhelmed by the response since we've been sort of talking about this and looking into it. I think it's something that organisations are increasingly aware of, but there's lots of sort of talk around it, but I'm not sure that we necessarily have all the answers or all the strategies in place yet within organisations. We know that people sort of having longer careers, that they're sort of working longer, and we have these sort of anecdotal ideas of what different generations or different age groups, how they might behave or what they might want from work, but what we don't necessarily have is a lot of data to back that up. So I think what we wanted to do with this study was to put some data behind it so that we could move away from some of the discourse which is focused on stereotypes and actually see how we can sort of build teams constructively where we have different age groups, different generations in play.
Yeah. I think this is funny. Vicky and I have a lot of conversation in the office, and I don't know about everybody attending this webinar, but your social media feed very much reflects you back, doesn't it? So I just have everything about, yes, I'm a Gen X. Yes, we're the best generation, obviously. And then Victoria's like, really? And then we have, Harriet in the office who is younger still. And there's always that sort of, I'd call, discussion. It's all done very tongue in cheek about generations and the differences, etc. But everything is done more on gut feel, isn't it, rather than the stats behind it. But we do know how important this is. I've got a couple of papers in front of me, and it's really interesting that a Deloitte study said that only 6% of respondents agreed that their leaders know how to effectively manage intergenerational inclusion within teams. So this highlights that we need to be talking about this. And then there's a 2024 LinkedIn study. And this is quite scary, I thought, actually. Only 1 in 5 Gen Z employees has spoken to a colleague over 50 in the past year, whilst 44% of workers over 55 admitted to avoiding conversations with younger employees. Whoa, that's interesting, isn't it? There seems to be a real division when it comes to generation and the workplace.
Absolutely. And as we're saying, I think it's really important that organizations kind of have a handle on this, because we know that good teams need effective communication. So, and we can't be sort of ruling each other out on the basis of these differences, which might sort of go unnoticed or less observed compared to the other kinds of diversity that we're more used to talking about. So yeah, it's a really important area to get to grips with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we talk about diversity, don't we, within teams? And there's so many elements of diversity that we need to talk about and we need to embrace. Age is also one of them. It's not just behavior. There's so many different factors and we need to embrace it. And I think that's the key thing isn't it, is to recognize it and embrace it. But that's not always easy, especially if we're embracing something which is based on a gut instinct, as opposed to something which is backed up by science and research.
Absolutely. So what we wanted to do with this piece was to look at data that we already have, that we collect when people complete the self-perception inventory, which is the Belbin questionnaire, essentially, that we use to derive team roles, so to tell people about their strengths within the team. And in order to sort of make this debate more constructive, we wanted to look at that data and use that as a lens to understand the impact of generational diversity and to sort of build that understanding within teams. We wanted to sort of question these stereotypes that have popped up and look at what the data says. So that was the starting point, really.
Absolutely. So we analysed quite a few of the SPIs, didn't we?
Yeah, so as I say, this is there are sort of some additional questions at the end of the Belbin questionnaire. They're optional questions that people can complete, and they ask all kinds of things. But one of the questions is age group, And there are a number of other things which we'll look at as we go through. But we've got at the moment over 60,000 responses that we could use. And alongside those responses, we have the team role data, so we can say, which age groups that these people sort of fit into in terms of team roles. And this was quite a diverse study. So we have people from over 100 countries, which is amazing, I think, actually, and across 22 industries. So this really is to sort of give us that breadth of understanding of how what we can learn really about the links between age and our strengths.
I'd just like to pause here when we sort of think about data, because we can't do what we do without this wealth of data here at Belbin. So we have been constantly looking at this data, and we do. I mean, this is part of Vicky's role and responsibilities within Belbin HQ, is to ensure the data is measuring what it needs to measure, making sure the outputs and the inputs and everything is as useful, but also as accurate as it can be. Without that data, we can't make changes. We can't do things based on fact. Very often, we'll get lots of customer feedback about things, but we don't want to make decisions based on probably the loudest person or somebody's opinion or what happened, it was in the news last week. We need to make decisions based on hard data. And this is why it's so important that we get this. And it's so important that we continue to get this via our Interplace platform. So every time somebody fills in the self-perception inventory, the observer assessments, we get that data. And this really helps us inform not just what we're doing now and what we've done in the past, but how we need to change things for the future.
Absolutely.
So big up your department a bit there, Vicky.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Okay, so let's sort of dive in and look at what we exactly what we studied. So as I mentioned, these are questions that appear at the end of the self-perception inventory. So we didn't ask people which generation are you in, because it's not really the most scientific way of gathering that data, particularly because there's a little bit of disagreement. Generations aren't sort of fixed. We can't say there was one year where things flipped from one to the other. But this is the source that I found, which is in the paper, as a kind of a reliable source for where those boundaries are. So they don't fit exactly with the age groups that we had in our study, but they correspond roughly. So we've got the baby boomers, which is the oldest sort of generation in the workforce at the moment. Generation X, which is, as Joe said, it's obviously the best one. And that sort of roughly maps. In our study, we've got two sort of age groups which are in the millennial category, and then the lowest age group which corresponds with Generation Z, but obviously the youngest members of Generation Z aren't sort of in the workforce yet. And yeah, you do get these sort of edge cases, don't you, with anything like this? I'm apparently a geriatric millennial, which means I'm borrowing a little bit from Generation X, but some characteristics of millennial as well. So it's not an exact science. So we did sort of, we talk about those generational groups in the paper, but all of the data really is about the specific age groups. Okay. So on to our sort of our first finding. So before we sort of dived into any particular team role data, we wanted to corroborate something which I think we had a feel for at Belbin, but it's really good to have the data to back that up, which is that with age comes more certainty about our strengths. So what exactly do we mean by that? Well, if you're not very familiar with Belbin, Belbin is about measuring the 9 team roles, and those team roles are sort of clusters of behaviour which are needed to help the team to progress. And individuals might have different elements of these clusters of behaviour, and those behaviours can change during our career, but they're really about celebrating the strengths, the contributions that people bring to a team. And the first thing that we found was that the older cohorts tended to be clearer about what those strengths were. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So those of you who know the Belbin reports will be quite familiar with these style of graphs. So we've got the team role abbreviations there along the bottom. and the other axis is the percentile score. So when you complete your Belbin survey and you get your report back, you'll have a percentile score for each team role, and that is essentially the strength of that role in comparison to the rest of our database, which, as we said, is quite a large data set now.
It's this current norm base, because we change things and keep things up to date, is 190,000 SPIs, and that's a international database.
Yes, yeah. So if you are, say, in the 80th percentile, that means that you are stronger than 80% of the population of our database in that role. And what you can see here is two very different sort of looking graphs. The one on the left is fairly flat, so there's not the team role strengths are not so pronounced. And with the one on the right, it's quite a steep curve. So we've got those top three roles there that are strong. We've got the grey bar there, the monetary evaluator, sort of in the middle, and then we've got some other strengths that that don't sort of come up so often. And it's fair to say that what we're looking for really is to hone those strengths as we progress in our careers. So we're not spending a lot of time on trying to bring weaknesses up to a certain level, or lower team roles, I should say, because that dulls those strengths. So we're really looking at cultivating our strengths. Again, these might change. We're not sort of saying that things are set in stone, but it's really about being able to do what you do really well, isn't it? So with that in mind, what we discovered was that as we grow older, we become a bit more definitive in declaring our team role strengths. So what do we mean by that? Well, we looked at the distribution of team roles. So if you have that fairly flat profile, I'm just going to go back to the previous slide. If you have this flat profile on the left, the gap from your highest role to your lowest role is going to be smaller than for the person on the right. So we looked at what's that distribution and what are the patterns that emerge. Well, for the youngest cohort, they've got the smallest gap. So they've got the flatter profiles. They're not so sure of what their strengths are. And as we get older, that graph really sort of teases out, and people are much more perhaps able and willing to say what those strengths are, to work with people with complementary strengths, maybe to manage the things that they're not so good at doing, or to be able to delegate those if they're moving into senior roles.
Yeah.
And we looked at this. Actually, there's more detail in the paper on this, but for those of you who are accredited, you'll be familiar with the idea that there are control statements in the Belbin questionnaire as well. And what these do is they tell us about how somebody is responding. They give us a bit more of an idea of self-awareness. And we found that not only were younger people's profiles a bit flatter, but also that they were sort of flagging these statements. So they were less certain about what it was they had to offer. And actually that's kind of what we'd expect, because this is a cohort that's newer to the workplace, perhaps newer to teamwork in general, if they haven't had a lot of exposure to it through the education system. And so we would expect that they sort of come into the workforce sort of perhaps ready to try out different roles, but not so definitive about what their strengths might be. So that was a really sort of clear trend we noticed, and I think it bears out, doesn't it, Jo? I think we knew this anecdotally, but it's nice to have the data to back it up.
And I think all the way through this, it is the case that you might, well, yeah, there's no surprises there, but this is backed up. I know that one of our late distributors in Australia, John Burns, he looked at all of the data of the CEOs he was working with within the engineering field in Australia, and he found exactly that. The CEOs had a far more distinct profile than the ones who'd just come in to the organisation. And he always used to say it's because people know where they're good and they know where they're bad. I mean, that's very simplistic, but he was saying, look, as we get older, we become more self-aware, we know where our strengths are, and perhaps we also have the permission to play to our strengths more as we progress. Whereas when we're younger, perhaps we don't have as much self-awareness, understanding of the contributions that we need to make in the workplace, but maybe we're not allowed to either. There's a few bits in there, isn't there, to come out, but I think this is really, really important.
Definitely.
I'm just going to stop you 1 second there, Vicky. I knew I couldn't keep quiet for that long. I did well. Somebody's asked, do you think that similar applies to things like MBTI self-perception? It's a great question, Mel. How does this alter when it comes to personality? I think it's a different conversation, to be honest with you. I'd be really interested to see what their data says with the other tools, because we're talking about behavior. And behavior is obviously something that we do. It's something that is tangible. People can see it. Whereas your personality is relatively fixed. So whether or not that changes so much, I don't know. Vicky, what do you think?
Yes, it really would be interesting to compare, I think. And I
Yeah.
think we'll come on to talking about that role of as looking at behavior, and we can see those changes as we progress. Whereas I think we tend to say with personality, sort of for the main, in the main, things tend to be more stable, as you say, don't they? And
Yeah.
don't change so much. Yeah.
Sorry, I
That's
interrupted.
okay. No problem. Okay. So we didn't just want to look at distribution of team roles, so that gap between highest and lowest role. We also wanted to look at strength of role, and we've talked about percentiles, so this score that's relative to the rest of our database. And this is really important, I think, about a point about team roles that you were making earlier, Jo, that it's not just about saying, these are my roles, or these are someone else's, and pigeonholing. It's about actually growing in the role, understanding what are the behaviors that make up that role, which bits of it am I really strong in doing, which do I need to sort of cultivate. And we wanted to look at the sort of the strength of roles. So how good an example is somebody of, a shaper or a team worker? How many of those attributes do they cover? How well do they manage the allowable weaknesses that are associated with that role? And so a strength of team role is more of an indication, I think, of the impact on the team rather than just the figure, if that makes sense. So again, what we found when we looked at the strength of role was that there weren't just sort of higher proportion, that they're actually the strength of the role was there as well. So the higher percentile scores. So it wasn't just about the shape of your graph. It's also how well you're able to play that role. And again, we had in this data, we had observer assessments mixed in as well. So the corroboration would come from others in the team. Yeah, that person's really strong at playing that plant role. And that's a really good sign, I think, because if people are sort of, it shows, I think, learning, doesn't it? It shows that people are learning in their roles throughout their career. So I think that's a really positive thing.
Oh no, absolutely, it does, and it also, I think, shows the importance of data, because it's really important that we have this percentile, because once we have a percentile, we can measure the change. How much are you strengthening that strength? People obviously come up to us very often and say, "Oh yes, hi, my top role is plant." And you have to ask the questions. Okay, so how often do you get to play it? How have you developed that? How have you been able to make your plant contribution the best it possibly be? For the team. What development have you under? No, it's just my top role. So we need to be able to measure that your top role may be plant, but how does that increase as you go through your career, or decrease depending on what else that you need to show what the team needs. So again, I think this is really important, because we can see change here. We can
Yes.
really map change, not just of the team role, but the amount, the strength of.
Yeah. And actually, Graham's just put, are we clearer about our strengths as we get older and or less flexible? I think, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? But I think that what we're seeing is, if we were just seeing that the team role graph was becoming more pronounced, I'll do it that way, sorry, but that people weren't strong examples, I think that might suggest inflexibility, because then they'd be saying, it's like Jo says, these are my roles and that's it. Whereas if we're seeing the strength of the role increase as well, I think that indicates that they are better at playing it. So it could be that there's that I suppose what we are finding is that we do sort of pick a few roles and stick with them as we get older, but there's obviously that sort of strength of role in there as well, so that the experience of playing it throughout a career has a bearing. Okay.
I like this one.
I went off on a bit of a tangent then, which
You did,
sometimes
didn't you? I love
it
this.
happens when you're looking at data, doesn't it? So I mentioned at the beginning that we don't just have age group, we ask quite a lot of different questions, and one of the questions that we asked was about managerial level, and so we had that alongside the age group. So when I was looking at the team role distribution, I thought, well, actually, it turned out that it wasn't just younger people that had these flat profiles, it was also middle managers. So their bars for that team role distribution are a lot lower. So their graphs were flatter too. But what they didn't have were these higher responses to the control statements. So that means they were playing lots of different roles, but it wasn't about having low self-awareness as it was with younger people. So what happens then sort of in the middle of our career? Why did that suddenly change? And why are our graphs sort of relatively more pronounced if we're not in management roles? And I think basically there's more managing up and managing down, isn't there, when you're sort of in those roles, that you're finding that you might need to be play a team worker, implementer when you're talking to your manager. But with those you manage, your roles might be quite different. There might be more shaper to get things moving. And so there are lots of different sort of elements at play here. But I just thought it was quite an interesting sort of side, it's almost a tangent to what's going on.
It is. Do you know what it brings to me? Is that you have, when you're in non-management, you've got high self-awareness perhaps, and you know the contributions that you need to play. You know the behaviours that are needed for you to make that successful contribution for the team. You know everything really well. We've all been there, haven't we? We're at the top of our game, and then we get promoted, and suddenly we don't have that luxury anymore to just concentrate on us and what we're good at. We've got teams to be involved. We're leading teams, within teams. And there's a stat, isn't there? I'm just looking at it on my other screen, that the Chartered Management Institute, the CMI, looked at. And they said that 82% of new managers in the UK are accidental managers. So they're taking on a role with no training. They did happen to find themselves into this spot. And this could be here. It's like, I'm really not too sure of what this management thing is, but I know I have to be a lot more things to a lot more people. And maybe that's where that flatness of the team role profile comes in. And it's only when we get used to this, it's only when I'd say perhaps with the senior management, you've been able to build an incredible team around you. You've had the luxury of being able to delegate those roles, which aren't your natural strengths, that suddenly we see that more definitive team role distribution again. I think we could have a discussion about this for a whole webinar, so I'll be quiet now.
Great. No, that's it. Maybe Peter Principle in action. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. So the next thing that we looked at was looking at particular team role strengths. So not just whether the strength of our strengths, if you like, and how that changes over our careers, but are particular team roles associated with different age groups. So how do the team role trends change with age? And for some team roles, there was a relationship. For others, we didn't find a particular relationship. And I wonder whether, if you want to put in the chat, if you have any ideas about which team role strengths you think might have, for which age might have a bearing. It'd be really interesting to see before I sort of flip on to the next slide.
No, please do. So if anybody can think of which team roles, there was a correlation with age, please put your guesses, your educated guesses, obviously, into the chat. It would be interesting to hear what you think. Just saying that we have here, okay, so more specialists as people get older, perhaps. Coordinator. I think what will be quite interesting, there's a few questions about different parts, different things that we could measure. I'll put that in the email that we send going out, saying what were the variables that we could measure when it came to the research questions, because some things we ask for, some things we don't. So we can only obviously analyse what questions we ask for there. Okay, Graham says coordinator with age. Then we have shaper. Rob, our eyes as you get older, more confidence communicating in a bigger network. Interesting. Do you want to put everybody out of their misery?
Shall I? Okay.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so you will find again more detail in the paper. I've listed the ones where there wasn't a relationship, but that's not so interesting. So I'll look at the strongest relationship first. which was coordinator. Absolutely. So a little pricey if you're not familiar with team roles. The coordinators are, they tend to be sort of mature, by which I obviously don't mean necessarily in age, but they have that breadth of outlook. They're very consultative, they take a broad view, they're good at sort of identifying talent and using talent within the team, and delegating effectively. They're good delegators. So it's no surprise, I think, that we see that sort of increasing with age, not just, I suppose, needing perhaps a bit of maturity and understanding, but also having the opportunity to delegate, which you don't necessarily have at the beginning of your career. So I think a really clear relationship there. And just looking at top team role. And again, going back to this idea that there are different elements that make up each behavior. And so it might be that, you know, as a young coordinator, you might have certain elements of that role, but you might not be in a position to be able to delegate to others. So it's really interesting, isn't it, to see there's still that percentage there, but it's just that you have the opportunity to cultivate it as you sort of progress through your career.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, Vicky. So I'm just going to re-emphasize that is, you know, each of these team roles isn't one thing. They are clusters of behaviors that make up each of these team roles. And you could still have something in your top role, but maybe not ticking each one of those clusters, each one of those elements of those clusters, sorry. So this gives us the element of growth. They're not just I am a, it allows you to think, how can I become a better example of, how can I be a stronger coordinator? It allows that growth. It's very rare that we see people ticking virtually every box for each of those team roles.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at some of the other responses that we've had. Okay, so stronger shaper with younger generations, plant implementer. Okay, interesting. So some of the research I've just sort of done an introduction to in the paper. One of the papers that I looked at suggested that creativity was something that you'd find in younger generations, and that you'd get more strategic decision makers in amongst older generations. What I found when I looked at the other team role, which is associated with wisdom, I suppose we'd say, wouldn't we, Jo? Which is monitor evaluator, was actually quite surprising. So there was actually a slight decline in the percentage of the group with monitor evaluator as their top team role, which was unexpected. And that sort of goes against the stereotype. We've got some strong we've got some decision makers, but then actually when we look at the strength of that role, so looking at that graph on the right hand side, again, this is our sort of the percentile scores. This is how well they're playing the role. That's quite a different shape. So we might have lots of young people who, or younger generations, where there's an interest in playing that strength, but actually at the outset of our career, that strength's not necessarily there. It's looking at the millennial cohorts where it sort of really seems to come into its own, and then it declines again. So that sort of goes a bit counter to the idea that, you know, we have to turn to older colleagues when it comes to strategic decision making. That was quite an interesting sort of upset, I think, to what I've seen certainly in the literature. And I think, again, an indication that we need to look at strength of role. And I think that goes for when we're feeding back reports as well. As you said, Jo, we're not just looking at what are your top two, we're also looking at how well you're playing the role.
Absolutely. And I think this one is really interesting, because it does go against perhaps what we would feel, you know, the older, the wiser, etc., etc. And it shows that we shouldn't make assumptions, and we'll talk about this later, but we shouldn't rule people out of decision-making strategic processes just because they are of a younger generation. And we could potentially be setting ourselves up to fail if we do, or if we don't ask for their opinions. We're not always wiser, and this is what the data is showing.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention that we know that people are more engaged when they're playing to their strengths. So even setting aside the idea of what we think should happen, if people have those strengths, you know, and others can see them, then we should be cultivating those, shouldn't we, for engagement and, you know, to help those teams. Okay, so on to our next couple of team roles. So looking at the idea of creativity, again, if you're not familiar, Plant and resource investigator are both team roles that are concerned with creativity. Plants is very much sort of starting with a blank page, that originality, that lateral thinking, and coming up with solutions to difficult problems. With resource investigator, it's that innovation sort of comes from being inquisitive, from exploring, finding out what's going on, bringing those ideas back to the team, and sort of borrowing, isn't it, really? So I wasn't going to say steal, I was going to let you say that. So this is interesting because at first glance, again, this kind of supports what we've seen elsewhere in the literature, that we've got this trend downwards, albeit quite slight on the plant graph, and increasing a little bit on the resource investigator side. But again, when we look at the strength of role, and someone said exactly this in the comments, it completely flips. So although we might have more people who want to play plant and resource investigator at earlier stages in their career, when we look at the people who are playing it best, these are in the older generations. So as somebody said, a resource investigator with a stronger network that's built up throughout a career, a plant who perhaps is sort of used to making sure they check in with the team to make sure they're coming up with those maybe fewer ideas, but that are really what the team needs. Managing those difficulties of communicating, those allowable weaknesses, and that's something that, although we might see the higher incidence of those roles amongst younger people, we're actually seeing the strength of those roles as we get older.
So again, it's kind of saying what we said with the monitor evaluator. Don't say that just because you're a younger generation doesn't mean you can't be wise, but it's also saying just because you're an older generation doesn't mean you don't have, those innovative tendencies. Our ideas are as valuable as others. We need to make sure that we don't write people off due to the assumptions and the stereotypes that we make.
Absolutely. And then the last one that we're going to look at is completer finisher. So this is the sort of detail-oriented role. This is checking that things are accurate, that there aren't mistakes or omissions. And perhaps sort of contrary to the coordinator role, which is the bigger picture, we see this sort of going down over time. So it's not necessarily the case. You could be a coordinator, completer, finisher, theoretically. That's a valid combination. Any combination is valid, but it's interesting that as the bigger picture kind of increases as we go through our careers, we're perhaps more able to delegate the detail, or we have to delegate the detail. We might find that there's not the capacity, as people are in senior management roles, to be able to hone that role so much. So that was one that we sort of saw decline with age. Absolutely. Yes, Gary. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat now.
I'm getting distracted
yes,
as well. Stop it.
Yes, we can find the source for the quote that you gave about managers.
I've just copied and pasted it on my toolbar there, so I'll put it straight into the email.
Brilliant. Okay, so those were the team role links in broad terms. And it's all really interesting, isn't it? I guess we started off with, this is an issue that teams and organizations are wanting to address. So it's great to have the data, but then we need to have the so what, don't we? What Absolutely. Do we do about this? And so we've come up with a number of recommendations based on these findings. How do we use this information to help our teams work more effectively together? Don't worry if you can't see that. You're not meant to be able to see all the detail. It's just to give you an idea. This is taken from the Belbin individual report. So the first recommendation is that we should look at assessing strengths and capabilities that we have in the team rather than making assumptions. And we've talked about this, I think, throughout, haven't we? That we need to be giving, we need this sort of common language that we can give to teams that they can use to move past those sort of divisive stereotypes, and to be able to say, actually, I do have a lot in common with this person. I'm also, someone who's quite detail focused, or I did this, I might have played that role more so earlier in my career, and this is how things have changed. So I think when we begin to sort of build in this this sort of impartial language, it takes the conversation away from stereotypes, really, doesn't it?
It does. I just to re-emphasize this, the quote right at the very beginning, and I'll find the link for that as well, saying only 1 in 5 Gen Z employees had spoken to a colleague over 50 in the past year. If perhaps we said, right, okay, so we want people to come up with new ideas for this new product, and we'd like all those ones with really, with resource investigator plant strengths to have that discussion. You're defining it by the type of discussions you want, the type of behaviours that you want, as opposed to, oh, I've got to go and talk to an old crusty. So what we need to do is really change that narrative. So it's not like I'm not talking to them because they're really old. It's like, well, actually working together, we're going to have some really good ideas, or they can help perhaps teach me how to do something. So we really need to frame this, use the language of Belbin, because in so many different ways, it's not just age, actually, it helps us to be able to really embrace diversity and also sort of chuck out those stereotypes, whatever they may be. It gives us that neutral team language that we need.
Absolutely. The second recommendation, there's more sort of detail in the paper, but we talked at the beginning about self-awareness. We know that self-awareness is lower amongst people entering the workplace, and we need this sort of structured way to ask for feedback and receive feedback. This is where we find out about strength of role. We can find out what the impact that our behaviours are having on the team, and really sort of have something measurable that we can return to. That's the beauty, as Jo was saying earlier, of behaviour, is that it's something that's very sort of externally obvious and visible. It's something that we can measure. It gives the team, it gives the individual a reality check, because it gives the team a say, essentially, doesn't it? And sort of puts all that together. Sorry, Jo.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, we don't really want to go through our careers constantly just looking in the mirror. We need to understand what our impact is and how to make it, but we need to be able to measure. We need to be able to measure our impact and which behaviours we think we are contributing, rather than just making assumptions of ourselves. This is also really useful. I was working with an organisation yesterday, and they were talking about how much the cultural, the culture of the organisation affects the behaviours that are not just displayed, but which ones which are aspired towards. So it could be that you're going into a really fast-moving organisation where they really value shaper, coordinator, resource investigator behaviour. Well, when you move into that organisation when you're younger, it could be that you think that, right, that's what I need to be. And so when you fill in these questionnaires, you may say, well, that's what I need to be, so therefore that's how I'm answering it. But it may not be your actual strength. So you do need to get that feedback to find out what it is that you are actually contributing, because there can be a big disconnect. We've seen the papers that show that there's I can't remember which, it was an HBR, wasn't it, that only 15% of us are actually self-aware, and that we need to get viewpoints from others. We need to get that, delicate sort of combination of viewpoints from ourselves and from others we work with to help inform us and help us increase that self-awareness. It's really important, and we can measure this.
Absolutely.
I think
Yep.
stupidly I put my report on the
You
next
did.
page.
I just put
It's
it
an
up now.
old one. It's not a new one. It's okay. It's a little bit old. What an observer assessment looks like in terms of Belbin is that basically people that you trust, your trusted critics, can feed back on you within the working environment, within the teams that you're working in. And all they have to do is tick words that they think describe you more than most. So not that, oh, everybody's got that word. No, Jo really does show this more than most people. And what you are able to get is the data that then goes in to inform your profile generally, but you get this wonderful page. And I can see that I have 11 ticks for broad in Outlook for my 7 observers, because they can each give 2 ticks for each word if it shows it so much. I've got outgoing, I've got competitive, I've got caring. That's nice. Impulsive was there, 7 ticks. Well, getting that self-awareness is really important, because then I can say, well, I'm going to work on that. And because this is behavior and not personality, we can check again in 6 months' time. Has impulsive gone up? Has it gone down? Has it stayed the same? How are you changing? And what are other people feeding back on?
Absolutely. It's that temperature check, isn't it, that you were
Absolutely.
talking about
Every
earlier.
time. Every time.
And where you have these strengths, like, for example, the coordinator strength in somebody who's younger within an organization, how are you going to sort of help them hone those talents? And that sort of takes us on to the next point. which is looking at contributions in terms of strength rather than just seniority.
Yeah.
And this may sound, at the first instance, it may sound naive. Of course, there are hierarchical structures and organizations that can't be ignored, but where are the opportunities to give strong monitor evaluator some opportunity to show that strategic side, that analytical side? Are there projects where you could let a younger coordinator sort of have some free rein to be able to hone those, in the knowledge that, as I say, you're building engagement as well, you're helping to sort of build that throughout somebody's career. And I think it was in HR magazine where they were talking about younger people wanting to sort of build their own business and have more sort of entrepreneurial opportunities. And so it's almost, people have to be able to cut their teeth on something. And there are sort of projects and opportunities that aren't business critical that can be that sort of training ground, if you like, for those roles, just to help people to be able to play to their strengths.
Yeah. In fact, a customer of ours did just that, large advertising organisation, is that they use Belbin throughout the organisation. They had it as part of their lexicon, they used to say. But what they did is they didn't want to pigeonhole as well. They didn't want to stereotype. They didn't want to pigeonhole. So whenever the opportunity arose for a non-business critical project, they actively encouraged everybody to take on what we call a more manageable role, one which they wouldn't naturally play, and to see how they got on. Is it something that they wanted to do more of, or was it something that perhaps they really need to do
Struggled
less
with.
of? Yeah, absolutely. But that's what we need to do, because we're not one-trick ponies. We're wonderful, complex human beings with so many strengths. So we need to be able to work out which ones we need to play, which ones we need to develop. We're not just one thing. We're not just one color, one set of abbreviations, spots, stripes, whatever. We're a wonderful mixture, and we need to appreciate the fact that we need to develop and grow. Just on this one as well, Vicky, it's quite interesting. We always say when we're running workshops is that the language of Belbin allows you to leave your job title, your seniority, and everything else, and your ego at the door, because for a team to be successful, you need to make sure that those contributions really are being made without worrying about all of the other factors, without worrying too much about hierarchy.
That's right.
Easier said than done, obviously.
And we probably shouldn't assume that everyone knows that this is the Belbin Team Report, which is sort of bringing data together from everyone in the team to show where you've got those where those different roles fit, where you've got gaps and any overlaps, and also suggestions of who you might call on to play different roles. And some of those might come as a surprise, as we've said, because of seniority or whatever that might be. So it's a really useful sort of tool to be able to start those discussions.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I was about to say, this sort of goes down to what is a successful team, doesn't it? It's we need these 9 team roles. We need to understand ourselves. We need to get that self-awareness. We need to get feedback from other people to understand the contributions that we need to make, and then we need to understand others as well. We need to understand what everybody else is bringing in, and we can do that without having to worry about generations, without worrying about any other factors, because for the successful team, we need everybody to make the best contribution they possibly can and to be supported by the rest of the team.
Absolutely. And just because I'm aware that we're coming up to the end of our time, aren't we? I'm just going to move us on to the last one, which is this responsibility to help people grow and develop. So we're looking to sort of develop that graph on the right, where we've got these pronounced strengths, and we really sort of hone those. And we know the areas where we might not be so strong, but we work with others where we need to sort of fill in those gaps. So we're not trying to produce a flat graph and be sort of average at lots of things. We're really sort of playing to our strengths. We know that increases engagement more so than being asked to sort of bring our weaknesses up to scratch or bring our lower roles up to scratch. And Jo, you've got a story, haven't you, about a wonderful example of somebody being sort of mentored through.
It was part of the Step Forward program that was put together by Legal and General, and they won a couple of awards for this program, and it was a management program, leadership program. And what they did is everybody was Belbined, and then throughout their 12 months throughout this program, they were actually paired with two people. I'm just checking this here. They were paired with a project partner and also a learning buddy, and they did that by having one person who had very similar team roles and one person who had very different team roles, so that the person going through this leadership course could actually learn from people who did their role really, really well, and also from people who did things very differently, as so to learn about difference and diversity. And they found this an incredibly empowering part of the program, is the learning from others. And they used the working relationship report, which is flavour of it's in front of you, is to see where those differences were when they were putting these people together. But people found that incredibly empowering, and so insightful to be able to learn from others, to have that growth throughout that leadership program and then into their roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the learning that you could get from somebody with very different team roles to your own is sort of so interesting and sort of distinct, but also from somebody who's, as you say, who's similar, has sort of been through maybe some of the same things that you have. So such a good approach, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just started reading the case study there. We'll put a link to that into the email. Okay, so we've looked at the data. We've analysed over 60,000 SPIs, the responses to the Belbin questionnaire, and we've looked at it in terms of age. And I think what we've found, Vicky, is that we shouldn't be making these assumptions.
Absolutely. And more than that we can use this understanding to actually build teams rather than as a sort of a source of division, if you like. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, all contributions are welcome. And that's what we need to do, is we need to support that and provide a language for that to happen. And I think Belbin, obviously, it's the gold standard team language. It's something that you can all embrace, and something that hopefully will get those younger generations talking to us old 50-year-olds and vice versa, by understanding it's the contribution that you need to make, and we need to learn and we need to grow together. So it should be, like I say, a source of strength within the team.
Absolutely. And just to end with a quote from Meredith, that simply putting together a number of people and expecting them to work as a team is not enough. And likewise, relying on stereotypes or on anecdote or the way that things have always been done, we know that doesn't sort of lead to better team performance. So we need to be really thoughtful and considered, and I think that's what the Belbin language is there to do, isn't it? Just to give us those talking points, those discussion starters.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody for joining us today, as we've been looking at intergenerational teams, looking at Belbin, looking at the research. We will be sending out the full report to everybody who's attended the webinar, and if you're watching a recording, please just get in touch and we can send you a copy too. It's not the cure-all, but I think it does help us to start thinking a little bit differently and acknowledging and appreciating difference, however that may represent itself. If you do have any questions at all, please do email team@belbin.com or just pick up the phone. We're here in the office and we'll be delighted to hear from you. So thank you so much for joining. Vicky, thank you. I'm going to start bullying you for some more cuts of the data soon to see what else we can see. And hopefully we'll be having another webinar looking at more research soon. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We hope to see you again. Thank you very much.